Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing a Shaddoll Felgrand deck profile. So this deck is really fun to play around with, especially with all the light targets in this deck, to be able to go for your copy of El Shaddoll Construct. This deck is really insane with being also able to summon out your copy of Divine Dragon Lord Felgrand, being a really cool, amazing boss monster. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below because we have some awesome rewards, you guys, like getting your name scripts for every single video, getting a signed card sent in the mail, or even getting a deck profile every single month that you are a patron. So, along with test hands. So, let's get straight on into this, guys. So, first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Divine Dragon Lord Felgrand. So, this card is actually the card that you're going to be using the majority of the time to summon out your El Shaddoll Construct because it has a really cool effect of being in the graveyard. This deck, like, with Shaddolls and this deck is so good to be able to just send your Felgrand to the graveyard. But what this card does is if this card is special summoned from your graveyard, then you get to target a monster your opponent controls or in their graveyard and banish it. And if you do, this card gains attack and defense equal to the banished original rank or level of the monster times 100. And if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, then you can target a level 7 or 8 dragon-type monster in your graveyard except another copy of itself and special summon it to your field, which is really good to be able to just summon out dragon monsters from your graveyard. We then play 3 copies of Archbrave Dragon, which is another really good target to be able to send to the graveyard off your copy of Shaddoll Fusion or out of your hand with El Shaddoll Fusion. What this card does is if it's special summoned from the graveyard, then you can banish as many face-up spells and traps your opponent controls as possible. And if you do, this card gains 2 turn attack and events for each of those banished spells and traps. Now this card came out when pendulums were big, and so that's what they were going for with this card, was actually to get rid of pendulums, but they don't do as much as they used to. What this card does is once per turn during your standby phase, if this card is in your graveyard because it was sent there this turn, then you get to target 1 level 7 or 8 dragon type monster in your graveyard except another copy of Archbrave and special summon it. So an ideal opening hand is going second, opening up a copy of Shaddoll Fusion and opening up a single copy of Dragon Shrine, because you're going to essentially get your entire graveyard set up with summoning out a copy of Construct and then sending from your deck to the graveyard a copy of Archbrave, Divine Dragon Felgrand, and a Shaddoll monster to be able to get you a Construct and then set yourself up for a copy of Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand on the following turn to be able to banish a monster off your opponent's side of the field. We then play 2 copies of Dragon Knight of Creation. Dragon Knight of Creation is a really neat card because it lets you increase this card's level by 4 during your opponent's turn only, and then when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can send 1 level 7 or 8 dragon type monster from your deck to the graveyard. And you can send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard and then target a level 7 or 8 dragon type monster in your graveyard and send this card to the graveyard and do you special summon that monster, which is a really good card to be able to revive your copy of Felgrand. If you send it to the graveyard, you can just immediately revive it back. The final effect of this card is the most relevant effect, to be able to send a card from your hand to the graveyard, and then you get to target a level 7 or 8 dragon type monster in your graveyard and revive it by sending this card to the graveyard as well. Yes, it is kind of a -1 because you're sending a card from your field or your hand to the graveyard, but it also has the ability that if you're sending that card from the graveyard, if you send a Shaddoll, you get the effect, which is still pretty good. We then play a single copy of Red Eye's Darkness Metal. Darkness Metal can revive a lot of your dragon monsters from the graveyard, and it's really easy to summon in this deck because you have so many different dragons in the deck. We then play a single copy of Amorphage Goliath. Goliath is really easy to summon in this deck, really easy to summon in this deck because you have so many different ways to summon it back with your copy of Archbrave, and having your ways to send it to the grave with your copy of Foolish Burial or your copies of Dragon Shrine. To be able to just bring it back onto your side of the field is really easy, and it makes it so neither player can special summon from the extra deck except for Amorphage monsters, which is not that big of a deal because we can lock ourselves into just summoning your copies of Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand, or Divine Dragon Lord Felgrand. We then play for the Shaddoll lineup. We're playing a single copy of Beast. Now, all your Shaddolls share an ability that if they're flipped, they get an effect, and if they're sent to the graveyard, they get an effect. So we're going to go over each one. If your copy of Shaddoll Beast is flipped, you get to draw 2 and discard 1, and if it's sent to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. Shaddoll Dragon, if it's flipped face up, you get to target a card your opponent controls and return to the hand. And if it's sent to the graveyard, then you get to target a card, target a spell or trap on the field and pop it. 2 copies of Squamata. Squamata, if it's flip face up, you get to target a monster on the field and destroy it. And if it's sent to the graveyard, you can send another Shaddoll monster from your deck to the graveyard. 1 copy of Hedgehog. Hedgehog, if it's flip face up, you get to add a Shaddoll spell or trap from your deck to your hand. And if it's sent to the graveyard, then you get to add a Shaddoll monster from your deck to your hand. 1 copy of Falco. If it's flip face up, you get special summon a Shaddoll from your graveyard in face down defense, which is pretty good. And if this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, then you get to special summon this card in face down defense. 2 copies of Shaddoll Windy. Shaddoll Windy is really, really good in this deck because if it's flip face up, then you get to special summon 1 Shaddoll monster from your deck in face up or face down defense. And if it's sent to the graveyard, you get to special summon a Shaddoll monster from your deck in face down defense. 1 copy of the Shaddoll Ariel. Shaddoll Ariel is a really combo-based card, but we're going to go over its effect really quickly. If it's flipped face up, you can target a banished Shaddoll monster and special summon it in face up or face down defense. And if this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, and then you get to target up to 3 cards in the graveyard and banish them. So this card is really, really combo heavy with your copy of the Shaddoll Incarnation. Shaddoll Incarnation is very important in this deck because you're going to be able to send it to the graveyard off the summon of Construct, and if you use your copy of Ariel with a copy of Construct and then send your Incarnation and then link away the Construct for something else, you can then banish your copy of the Incarnation and your copy of Construct while this is on your side of the field to be able to immediately flip it over with your copy of Incarnation, which will then revive your copy of Construct to your side of the field. So if you get this card, it's really, really important. You'll actually use your copy of Windy plus a light monster, like your copy of Felgrand to the graveyard, send those 2, and then go through the combo to special summon this off the Windy effect to be able to go off. We then play 3 copies of Ash Blossom as well. Not Shaddolls, but they're still really good in this deck. The Shaddolls or the Ash Blossoms are really good because you can just use them to stop your opponent from doing all sorts of shenanigans. So that's it for the monster lineup. Let's get into the spells. Now the spells is where this deck starts to really, really heat up and really start to excel with all the different spells that you're going to be playing. So 1 copy of Monster Reborn. We're going to have a lot of revival spells in this deck. So Monster Reborn is just a good extender. 1 copy of Foolish Burial. Foolish Burial is very, very, very pivotal in this deck because it's super helpful to be able to get your particular plays off, to be able to send your cards from your deck to the graveyard. 2 copies of Dragon Shrine, which is essentially playing Foolish Burial number 2 and 3, which is super helpful in this deck to be able to send a particular dragon that you need to the graveyard. 3 copies of Return of the Dragon Lords. Return of the Dragon Lords is ridiculous in this deck because you can send your Felgrand from your deck to the graveyard as a cost, or not a cost, but a card as a fusion material from your deck to the graveyard for your Shaddoll Fusion. And if you have this in your hand or a copy of Monster Reborn and you're going second, then you can immediately revive it back and be able to bounce or pop a card on your opponent's side of the field, which is really, really good to be able to just get rid of something on their side of the field. We then play 3 copies of Shaddoll Fusion. If your opponent controls a monster that's special summoned from the extra deck, your entire main deck becomes fusion material for all of your Shaddoll cards, which is really good to be able to send Felgrand, Archbrave Dragon, your copies of Goliath, your copies of any of the monsters that you need, any of your Shaddolls. It triggers all of their effects of your Shaddolls and triggers all of the effects of all of your your Felgrand to be able to get it out of the graveyard. Triggers Archbrave. It's just really, really, really good. We then play 3 copies of El Shaddoll Fusion because you're always going to open up Shaddolls in this deck. It's really easy to be able to open up Shaddolls because you play so many in this deck. If you open up a copy of Archbrave Dragon and a copy of a Shaddoll, you can just use this Summon Construct on your side of the field as quickly as possible. And then we play 3 copies of Super Polymerization. Super Polymerization is really ridiculous to be able to set on your side of the field, and then during your opponent's turn, you can just flip this, mid-interrupt them, or out a board. This card's really good to out a board because you can either out cards that are other Shaddoll boards, or a dark monster or a light monster on your opponent's side of the field, or 2 dark monsters if they're playing, because you're playing Starving Venom in the extra deck. This card is really, really good, and it's just good to be able to discard a copy of Archbrave or discard a copy of Felgrand to get it out of your hand, so you can just keep going with your particular plays. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps, because we do play 2 traps in this deck, and that is a single copy of Shaddoll Schism and a copy of Shaddoll Incarnation. These cards are ridiculous in this deck. This is essentially Miracle Fusion, because during your main phase, you can fusion summon 1 Shaddoll monster from your extra deck by banishing the materials from your field or graveyard, but it can attack directly, which is not a big deal, because if you summon Winda, it's just going to be ridiculous to be able to summon it during the main phase, because it can be during your opponent's main phase as well. And it also has the ability that then you can send to the graveyard 1 monster your opponent controls with the same attribute as the fusion monster, which is ridiculously good because you're going to be able to pop a card on your opponent's side of the field as well. That's the particular attribute, either light or dark, which is just really good. And then Incarnation, I kind of already went over. You get to target a Shaddoll in your graveyard and special summon it, but if it's in your graveyard, you can banish it and a Shaddoll monster from your graveyard to be able to flip a Shaddoll face up or face down, which is pretty good to be able to just trigger their effects like I showed you with the aerial combo. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing 3 copies of El Shaddoll Construct. Wow, that's a lot of Construct, but it's easy to summon in this deck. She is so easy to summon in this deck. And she has an amazing effect that if she battles a special summon monster, then she instantly destroys it. And if she's special summoned to your side of the field, then you get to send a Shaddoll spell or trap from your deck to the graveyard. And then also she has the ability that she's removed from the field for any reason, then you get to target a Shaddoll spell or trap in your graveyard and add it back to your hand if this card is sent to the graveyard for any reason at all. She's an amazing card and one of the most powerful boss monsters in the entire game, to the point she was banned for a very long time, which super gave me sad face. We then play 2 copies of El Shaddoll Winda. El Shaddoll Winda has the same exact effect to be able to retrieve a Shaddoll spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand as she's sent to the graveyard. She can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and she also makes it so either player can only special summon once per turn. Really easy to summon in this deck because you play so many dark monsters in the form of Shaddolls, and she's super good to be able to put on your opponent's side of the field during their opponent's turn with Schism, because you can just put it on your opponent's or your side of the field during your opponent's turn and then be able to just stop so many potential plays that your opponent's going to go off with. 1 copy of El Shaddoll, Apokalon. Apokalon is good because it's a good combo piece. It can be destroyed by card effects or by battle, and it also has the ability that if this card is special summoned, then you get to target card on the field and negate its effects, or if this card is sent to the graveyard, you get to add a Shaddoll card from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and then you discard a card, which is again not cost, so your Shaddolls get to trigger, which is pretty good. We then play a single copy of Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. Starving Venom Fusion Dragon is a good super poly target because you can use 2 dark monsters on your opponent's side of the field to trigger its effect. Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand. Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand is really good because you can overlay 2 dragon monsters, like 2 Felgrand dragons for this, and be able to eat card effects because you can just detach a material from this card and makes it so the monster is unaffected by all card effects, which is just really good. But it negates its own effects, which is not that big of a deal, but it's just really an overall good card. Number 38. Number 38 just negates spells or traps. It's an overall good card to end with because you can just negate so many spells or traps. For the Link monsters, we're playing a single copy of Access Code Talker to pop cards on the field. Selene is surprisingly good in this deck, okay? So Selene is an interesting card because she can revive a spellcaster from the graveyard, because once per turn during your main phase, you can quick effect remove 3 spell counters from this card, special summon a spellcaster from your hand or graveyard in defense position to a zone this card points to. How do you get spell counters on this card? It's very simple. If this card's Link summon, you play spell counters on an equal number of spell cards on the field or in the graveyards, which is either player's graveyard that you put it on this card, which is really, really interesting to be able to put multiple spell counters on this card, remove it, and then summon Winda back to your side of the field, or any Shaddoll that besides Construct, which is really amazing. We then play a single copy of Unicorn to be able to spin stuff, Phoenix to pop spells and traps, Cross Sheep because it is a primarily fusion-based deck to be able to revive your monsters from the graveyard. It's a really good card to be able to revive level 4 or lower monsters from the graveyard like your Shaddolls. And then a single copy of Heraldic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres. Heavenly Spheres is really easy to use in this deck because you can use this card to be able to use 2 Felgrands on your side of the field, or use an Archbrave and a Felgrand and summon this, and then it can revive, or it can summon a Felgrand from deck, but it makes its attack 0, but it doesn't negate its effects, which is pretty good. Or it can summon Darkness Metal to be able to revive a Felgrand from graveyard. It's just an overall really good card to play as a one-of in the deck. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really insanely fun deck to play around with, and it's very budget too with the Shaddoll core in the deck. Like, Shaddolls are not super expensive anymore, and it's just really fun, especially with the Shaddoll Showdown structure deck coming out. The majority of the stuff actually you can get as commons in this deck, and it's really easy to pick up. Like, you're basically taking 2 structure decks and throwing them together, which is kind of cool. So that's it for this deck, guys. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell next to become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.